I hope you all enjoyed having the math pirate read and do math on Thursday. I enjoyed having the break. And I hope you enjoyed our last Sherlock Holmes story. Our next one is called The Adventures of the Speckled Band. Right there. I have to tell you before we start, so I was on my way to school this morning, and the sprinklers must have been on in the field because all of the water was coming out of the playground onto the sidewalk, and I didn't see this huge worm. Like, it must have been a foot long and like thick, and I don't know how I missed it, but I was just looking at other places, and I didn't see it till the last minute, and I rolled right over it. I felt so bad. I did not mean to squish a worm this morning. And I can't help but feel like the worm must have been pretty upset too. Man, stupid people. Gotta watch out for pedestrians. Anyways, hopefully it can live in two different parts now. The Adventures of the Speckled Band. It was early in April in the year 1883 when Sherlock Holmes and his assistant, Dr. John Watson, were sharing Holmes's bachelor apartment at 221 Baker Street that the good doctor awoke one morning to find the great detective standing, fully dressed, by the side of his bed. As a rule, Holmes was a late riser, so Watson blinked in surprise to notice the clock on the mantel showing only 7:15 a.m. "Sorry to wake you, Watson," said Holmes, "but Mrs. Hudson has awakened. She woke me, and I'm waking you." We're all waking each other. "And just why did our good housekeeper wake you?" asked Watson. "It seems a client has arrived, a young lady who is quite excited and insists on seeing me immediately. She is waiting in the sitting room. When a young lady is up and about London at this hour, waking people out of their beds, I conclude that she has an urgent problem to discuss. I thought that if it proved to be an interesting case, you'd want to be on the heart of it." "My dear Holmes, I wouldn't miss it for anything," cried Watson as he jumped out of bed and threw on his clothes. "My greatest pleasure is following your investigation and admiring your rapid and logical deductions." I don't think I would be saying that at 7:15 in the morning. A few minutes later, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson opened the door of the sitting room. A lady, dressed in black and heavily veiled, rose from her seat near the window. "Good morning, madame," said Holmes cheerily. I'm Sherlock Holmes, and this is my friend Dr. Watson. You may feel as free to speak in front of him as with me. Please, let us sit near the fire, which Mrs. Hudson has had the good sense to light. I see, madame, that you are shivering. I shall order a cup of hot coffee." "It's not the cold that's making me shiver," said the woman softly as she moved nearer the fire. "It's fear, Mr. Holmes." As she spoke, she raised her veil, revealing a pale, drawn face with frightened eyes, like those of a hunted animal. She appeared to be no more than 30 years old, but her dark hair was already streaked with gray, and her expression was weary and haggard. "You must not be afraid," said Holmes, soothingly, patting her hand. "We shall help you. Ah, I see you have come in by train this morning." "But how would you know that?" she asked. "Did you see me at the station?" "No, madame," answered Holmes, "but I see part of a return train ticket sticking in the wrist of your left glove. I also see that you had a long drive in a cart along a muddy road before you reached the station." The lady gasped and stared in bewilderment at Holmes. "It's no mystery, madame," said the detective with a smile. "The left arm of your jacket is splattered with mud in 7 places." Like he counted all of them. "Only a cart throws up mud that way, and only when you sit on to the left of the driver. Remember, it's England, so the driver sits on the right side and the passenger sits on the left side in England, the opposite of America." "You are correct," said the lady. "I started from home before 6, reached the village of Leatherhead at 6:20, and took the train to Waterloo Station. But enough of that, sir. I cannot stand this strain any longer. I shall go mad if it continues. I have no one to turn to except one man who cares for me, and although I cannot pay you for your services now, in a month I shall be married, and will have then my own income." "Please don't concern yourself with payment," said my dear Holmes. My dear madame," said Holmes. "My profession is its own reward." He must be rich. "Now please tell us how we might be of service." The woman leaned forward and smiled weakly. "Do not think, Mr. Holmes, that my terror is simply the imagination of a nervous woman. You are famous for sorting out real dangers from imagined ones, so I came to you for help. My name is Helen Stoner. I live with my stepfather, Dr. Grimsby Roylott, the last survivor of the noble Roylott family of Stoke Moran in western Surrey. Holmes nodded. The family name is familiar. At one time, continued Mrs. Stoner, or Miss Stoner, the Roylotts were one of the richest families in England, but in the last century, our four heirs were wasteful and squanderers, and finally, the last, a gambler, lost everything except a few acres of land and 200-year-old house, which is heavily mortgaged. His only son, my stepfather, realized that he would have to earn his own living. So, with money borrowed from a relative, he went to a medical school and established a large and successful practice in Calcutta, India, because it was the British in the 1900s and 1800s were in India. They, what would the word be, colonized India, like they did the United States and Africa. They had, like, Australia, they had places everywhere. However, this was brought to an abrupt end when Dr. Roylott suspected his native butler of robbing him and beat the man to death. The doctor was imprisoned for many years and returned to England a defeated and a depressed man. However, during his stay in India, Dr. Roylott married my mother, Mrs. Stoner, the young widow of a British Army officer serving there. My twin sister Julia and I were only 2 years old at the time. Mother had a very comfortable income, more than £1,000 a year. In her will, she left that sum to Dr. Roylott as long as Julia and I lived with him. However, when Julia and I married, part of that £1,000 would go to each of us. The will took effect 8 years ago, shortly after our return to England, when my mother was killed in a railway accident. We left London after her death, and Dr. Roylott took Julia and me to live with him in his old family house at Stoke Moran. The money my mother had left us was enough for all our wants. But a terrible change came over my stepfather about this time. Despite the joyous welcomes of his old friends and neighbors, Dr. Roylott shut himself up in the old house and became only to quarrel with anyone who came near the place. Violent tempers seemed to have inherited in the men of the Roylott family, and in my stepfather's case, these led to several brawls which ended in court. The local people then took to running from him, not only because of his uncontrollable anger, but because his immense strength as well. Last week, he hurled a local blacksmith over a wall into a stream, and it was only by paying over all the money I could gather that I kept him out of court. His only friends seemed to be the herds of wandering gypsies who are allowed to camp on the estate. In return, they let him travel with them, sometimes for weeks at a time. He also has a passion for Indian animals, and from time to time, several are sent over from India. Right now he has a cheetah and a baboon wandering freely over the grounds of the estate. That's a little different. A cheetah just loose and a baboon. The villagers fear these animals as much as they fear my stepfather. You can see, Mr. Holmes, that my poor sister Julia and I did not have happy lives. No servants would work for Dr. Roylott, and we cared for the big house ourselves. Julia was only 30 when she died 2 years ago, but her hair had already begun to whiten, just as mine is doing. How did your sister die? Asked Holmes. Strangely, I fear, thought Mr. Holmes. You can well understand that living the life I described, Julia and I had no friends our age. However, my mother had a sister, Miss Honoria Westphale. Ugh, strange names. Oh, and here's a picture of Dr. Roylott with his cheetah and his baboon. Odd guy. Right. And Dr. Roylott permitted us to visit her occasionally. 2 years ago, during a Christmas visit Julia and I made there, Julia met a naval officer. They soon fell in love and became engaged. When I returned to Stoke Moran and told my stepfather of her plans, he did not object. But 2 weeks late before her wedding day, a terrible thing happened. Please, Miss Stoner, give me the exact details, said Holmes. I can do so easily, replied the woman, for every moment of that dreadful time is very clear in my memory. Let me begin by explaining that the manor house is very old. We occupy only one wing. The bedrooms are on the ground floor. The first is Dr. Roylott's, the second my sister's, and the third my own. There are no doors connecting them, but they all open onto the same corridor. And the windows of these rooms? Asked Holmes. They face a large lawn. That horrible night, Dr. Roylott had gone into his room early, but Julia knew he wasn't asleep, for she smelled his strong Indian cigars. Annoyed by the smoke, she left her room and came into mine, where we each sat chatting about the wedding. At 11 o'clock, she got up to leave, but at that door, she paused and looked at me curiously. "Tell me, Helen," she said, "have you ever heard anyone whistling during the night?" "Never," I said. "Why?" "During the last few nights, about 3 in the morning, a low, clear whistle awakened me. I couldn't tell where it came from. Perhaps the next room, father's room, or perhaps the lawn." "It was probably those wretched gypsies," I said, trying to explain it away. "Then why didn't you hear it too, Helen?" "Remember, Julia, I'm a heavy sleeper and you're a light one." "I'm sure it was nothing," she said, with a smile as she closed my door, and a few minutes later I heard her turn the key in her lock. "Did you and Julia always lock your bedrooms at night?" asked Holmes. "Always," replied Miss Stoner. "With those doctors, cheetahs, and baboons running loose, Julia and I felt safer that way." Of course, of course. Please go on," urged Holmes. "I couldn't sleep that night. It was almost as if I had a feeling that something terrible was about to happen. It was a stormy night, and the wind was howling and the rain was beating against the windows. Suddenly, amid the noise of the storm, I heard the scream of a terrified woman. It was my stepsister's voice. I sprang from my bed, wrapped a shawl around me, and rushed to the corridor. As I opened my door, I heard a low whistle, like the one Julia had described, and a few moments later I heard a clanging sound, as if something heavy and metal, had fallen. I ran to my sister's door and found it unlocked and swinging on its hinges, with Julia clinging to it and swaying almost like a drunkard. Her face was white with terror. Her hands groped towards me for help. As I caught her in my arms, her knees gave way and she fell to the ground, writhing and convulsing in pain. I bent over her and she suddenly shrieked out, "Oh my gosh, Helen, it was the band, the speckled band!" Then she lifted her hand weakly and pointed to Dr. Roylott's room. Then another convulsion seized her. I rushed out, calling loudly for my stepfather, who met him as he opened the door in his dressing room. When he reached Julia's side, she was unconscious. Even though Dr. Roylott sent for a doctor from the village, Julia died without ever regaining consciousness, she concluded with a sigh. "Miss Stoner, are you certain about the whistle and the clanging metal sound?" asked Holmes. "I could have sworn I heard it, but perhaps," and then here's her with her sister. A sad turn of events. "Perhaps the storm played tricks on me." "Was your sister dressed?" asked Holmes. "No, she was in her nightgown," said Miss Stoner, "but she was holding a box of matches in her left hand and the charred stump of a match in her right. That means she was trying to light a lamp when she became frightened. Tell me, Miss Stoner, did the coroner investigate your sister's death?" A coroner is someone who goes around and identifies people who have died, to make sure that they are actually passed away. Sometimes someone could just pass out and then they might think it is. So, and just to make sure, they always have a coroner give like a certificate of death. And sometimes they also will do investigations called autopsies, where they look at the body and try to figure out why the person died, if it's like an unusual case. "Very carefully, Mr. Holmes, especially since my stepfather's behavior has been strange. But the coroner couldn't discover any cause of death. Julia's door had been locked from the inside, and her windows had bars and shutters. The walls and floors were examined and found perfectly solid. The chimney is wide, but it's barred as well. No, Mr. Holmes, it seems certain that my sister was alone when she met her death." Were there no marks of violence on her?" asked Holmes. "None." "Signs of poison?" asked Watson. "The doctor examined her, but found nothing." "And what do you think she died of?" asked Holmes. "Pure fear, a terrifying shock, but I have no idea what frightened her." "Were gypsies camped on the estate at the time?" "Yes." "And what did she mean when she referred to a band, a speckled band?" Helen Stoner looked puzzled. "At first, Dr. Holmes, I thought Julia was just delirious. Then I thought perhaps she meant a band of people, the gypsies maybe. They do wear spotted handkerchiefs on their heads, so Julia might have been referring to that." Holmes shook his head. "I'm not satisfied. This all goes so much deeper, Miss Stoner, but please go on." "All that happened 2 years ago, and my life has been lonelier than ever, until lately. About a month ago, Percy Armitage, a dear old friend who I have known for many years, asked me to marry him. My stepfather did not object, and we are planning a spring wedding. Then it seems you're about to begin a happier part of your life, said Dr. Watson. That's what I believed, but 2 days ago, my stepfather had some workers start repairs in our wing of the house. My bedroom wall has been opened up, so I had to move into the room in which my sister had died and sleep in her very bed. Last night, as I lay there thinking of her terrible death, I suddenly heard a low whistle, the very same whistle that Julia had described to me, the whistle that announced her death. I jumped up and lit a lamp, but saw nothing. I was so shaken to return to bed, so I got dressed and sat there waiting for daylight. It's making me nervous. Ugh. When it came, I slipped out, hired a cart at nearby inn, and drove to Leatherhead. There I boarded a train to London and to you. That was wise of you, said Holmes, but you haven't told me everything. But I have, exclaimed the woman. You are shielding your stepfather, Miss Stoner, cried Holmes as he leaped up and pushed back the lace frill of the woman's sleeve cuff. 5 little red marks, the marks of 4 fingers and a thumb, were printed on the little wrist. Helen Stoner immediately covered her injured wrist. Dr. Roylott is a strong man, she said. Perhaps he doesn't even know his own strength. Sherlock Holmes, that's not good. She's got bruises from him. Sherlock Holmes was silent for several minutes as he leaned his chin, I want to know how he'd do that, on his hands and stared at the fire. Finally, he spoke. There are 1,000 details I need to know, Miss Stoner, and we haven't a moment to lose. I must come to Stoke Moran today and examine the rooms. Can it be done without your stepfather knowing it? I'm certain we can arrange that, Mr. Holmes. Dr. Roylott mentioned he was coming into London today on important business that would probably last all day. I can easily get our housekeeper out of the way. Excellent, cried Holmes. Watson and I shall be there. What are your plans for today, Miss Stoner? I have 2 errands to take care of in town, but I shall return on the 12 o'clock train. And we shall arrive early in the afternoon, said Holmes. I, too, have some business matters to attend to. Miss Helen Stoner dropped her thick black veil over her face as she rose. Thank you, Mr. Holmes, and you too, Dr. Watson. My heart is lightened since I have confided my troubles to you. And she left the room. Sounds like somebody's trying to kill her, too, just like Julia. And I bet it's for that money. What do you make of it all, Watson? Asked Holmes as he leaned back in his chair. A dark and sinister business, answered Watson. Yet, if Miss Stoner is correct in saying that the bedroom's floor and walls are solid, and that no one could have entered through the door, windows, or chimney, then her sister must have been alone when she met her mysterious end. But what of those whistles and the strange words of the dying woman? A speckled band? Asked Watson. I don't know, said Holmes. Well, we know that the gypsies were on the ground, and they are friends of Dr. Roylott, and we could guess that the doctor wanted to prevent his stepdaughter's marriage. Perhaps he had them frighten her, and the metallic clang might have been caused by the gypsies at the shutters? I don't quite agree, Watson, and that is why we're going to go to Stoke Moran today. But what's that noise, and what the devil? The door suddenly burst open, and a huge man stood framed there. Oh, man, I think I know who it is. He was so tall that his hat brushed the top of the door frame, and so broad he seemed to cover the opening from side to side. His clothes were an odd mixture of a professional man and a countryman, with a black top hat, a long frock coat, and a pair of high gaiters. A hunting crop swung in his hand. His large, wrinkled face was yellowed from the sun as he looked at Holmes and Watson with an evil stare. His deep-set, bloodshot eyes and his high, thin nose made him resemble a vulture. Oh, here he is. Here he is. Ah! Let's see, where were we? Which of you is Holmes? He cried. This is my name, sir, replied the detective quietly. But who are you? Dr. Grimsby Roylott of Stoke Moran, answered the man. Indeed, doctor, said Holmes coolly. Please have a seat. I will do nothing of the kind, roared the man. I followed my stepdaughter here. What kind of nonsense is she telling you? Why, the weather is a bit chilly, said Holmes, turning to Watson. That's odd. What has she been telling you? Screamed the old man furiously. I hear, though, that the crocuses will bloom well, continued Holmes, ignoring the man. Ignore me, will you? Cried the doctor, taking a step toward Holmes with his hunting crop raised. I know you. You are Holmes, the meddler. Holmes, the busybody. Holmes, the Scotland Yard jack-in-the-box. Means like you get into everyone else's business. Holmes chuckled. Your speech is most amusing, he said. When you leave, close the door, for I feel a draft. Wow, he's not even like getting into it with him. That'd be really hard. I'll go when I have had my say, cried Dr. Roylott. Don't you dare meddle in my business. I am a dangerous man to oppose. See that you stay out of my business, or I will do to you what I am about to you to your poker. Just watch. A poker is like a long metal piece with a sharp end on it that they would use to stir the fire, because back then they didn't have indoor heating, they had fireplaces. It's pretty thick, too. Like, what he's about to do would not be possible by most people. With that, he stepped forward, seized an iron poker from the fire, and bent it into a curve with his huge hands. Then he hurled the twisted poker into the fireplace and strode out of the room. Oop, here's a picture. Dr. Roylott bending the fire poker. Let's see. Where were we? He seems to be a very friendly person, said Holmes with a laugh. I'm not as big as he, but if he had stayed, I might have shown him what my strength could match his. And before Watson's amazed stare, Sherlock Holmes picked up the steel poker and straightened it out again. How dare he degrade me by calling me part of Scotland Yard? Scotland Yard is a detective agency in Scotland. They're supposed to be really good, but Holmes obviously, being the great detective Holmes, is supposed to be better than the Scotland Yard. But only hope that he will not punish Helen Stoner for having come here. And now, Watson, as soon as we have had our breakfast, I have some business to attend to at the Hall of Official Records. Looks like we probably have to stop there. So we're about halfway done with this chapter. So tomorrow we will finish The Adventures of the Speckled Band. And we will know what is going on with Julia and Helen. All right, I will talk with you guys tomorrow, and we will finish this chapter up. Bye, guys.